Good morning, and thank you for joining us for this week's live Q&A. We've got a special one here. We're going for 2 hours. We're going to be covering installing a nucleus, which is probably the easiest way to get started with your flow hive. We're also going to be harvesting a bit of honey. We're going to be
the super lifter.
The super lifter, and my dad's here. Stu is joining us today.
Yep.
And
good to see you all.
If we're lucky, my sister Mira might also join in to show you the macro bee side of things. A lot of the macro footage you see in our videos and things is my sister out there chasing bees around, so she may turn up as well. So stay tuned for that. But first of all, a bit of honey harvesting.
Lovely.
So what's happening here? Are we having a race? If you got questions, put it in the comments and we'll get to answering those. And what will happen is Trace, the familiar customer service voice, if you've ever called up our Flow HQ, she'll be reading those questions out and Stu and I will answer them. You can address the question to either of us or just generally, and we'll fight over who gets to answer it. Okay, yeah. So first of all, I can see some honey centrally in here, which is neat. A little missing cap there, which is always a good idea to put your caps back, or the ants move right in chasing those sweet treats. And we don't have a little cap. One. There we go, thank you. And we can pop that one in there. It's always nice to start with some observations from outside the hives, looking in the windows. After all, we put these windows on to give you a good insight into what's happening inside the hive. Now straight away I've got a question mark here. Is there enough bees in this hive? And maybe there isn't, but it's more likely we're in our winter here and we do get good honey flow through the winter. But what you see is the bees have all been clustering down here, but nevertheless the numbers are low in this hive. So it's something to be aware of. When you see the numbers low, you want to make sure you're activating your pest management tray down here, catching those hive beetles, which can be a real annoyance.
So compare what Cedar was saying with this hive, which is a little bit of condensation, so it's not so clear, but there's a lot more bees. So this is a hive where you're saying, yep.
They're not going to hear you unless I'm standing.
No, I've got a...
Okay, yeah, but is that transmitting too?
Yep.
Oh yeah, okay, great.
So we're just getting ourselves sorted for 2 people at once. And but yeah, you can see a lot more bees again on the sealed comb. You know, the bees have filled that with honey and sealed it. It's all ready to go. And it's, you know, front to back all the way through. Yeah. So this one, we're not worried about their numbers. We're not going, oh. We might want to look at the entrance and see what the activity's like. Pretty confident that this one will look reasonably busy. It's I don't know if the bees know it, but there's a lot of rain coming, and so if they do know that, they'll be going extra hard today to get a bit more nectar, a bit more pollen in before they get rained out again and have to stay home or fly in the rain.
Now have a look at this side. This is a really interesting view because what we've got is capped honey centrally, showing they are bringing in a lot of nectar at the moment, and so much so that they are starting to close in the cappings. They've really taken the water content down below that 18% range, hopefully, and then what they do is when the honey's ready, they put their wax capping on top. It's like the lid on a preserving jar to say this will keep without fermenting till later. And that's why if you harvest when it's all nice and capped, you can put a lid on the jar and it'll keep for a long time. In fact, sometimes 3,000 years if you're lucky. So
if you're lucky, you're going to live that long. Yeah.
So let's choose a frame. We're confident that there's a lot of honey coming in. Midwinter here, little caveat, not everywhere gets a lot of honey in the winter. In fact, most places in the world get a long cold winter with no honey at all. So the bees are storing it for that long winter, but here it never comes because we're in this temperate climate in a subtropical region. So we get a lot of flowers during the winter time, and that's why we can harvest here in the middle of our winter. So all we're going to do is, and this is my father and I's invention that we spent a decade working on, and it's now been out in the world for 11 years, and it's just still fun to turn the key and watch it flow. So all I'm doing is turning that key, and that's creating channels inside the comb, allowing the honey to flow down into the trough at the bottom and out. If you do it in segments like that, it's just a bit easier to turn. Do you want to get one going as well?
Yeah, we're right for it at the same time.
And so what we'll see is the honey flowing down into the tube there and into the jar. You can already see it flowing, which is neat, showing you that those pathways in the comb have been created and the honey's working its way down. This view here is quite interesting because that shows you what's happening in that single cell line, but that's what's repeated throughout the frame. So all the cell lines are doing exactly what's happening in this one you can see here, although the center ones will be warmer because of the brood nest right underneath. We're keeping the center of the frames a bit warmer than the extremities, so it'll be flowing a bit faster in the middle of the frame. So right above the brood nest is the warmest spot, and that's where the honey will be moving more quickly because the temperature makes the honey just a little more runny.
When you look at the back of this one, the frame toward a couple of frames here look pretty full, and as it happened, both of those are some of our original frames. So people often ask, how long do these flow frames last? Well, here they are still performing after 10 or 11 years. Can't say, but I know that that's an early frame just by the sort of plug that's in it, by the sort of stopper. So we'll be using that one, and because they're in the dark all the time in the beehive, or maybe stored in your shed, they won't degrade. And yes, we could talk a lot about that sort of thing, but basically they should last and last. Here's our little shelf made out of a door. And again, we're just going to insert the key a little way at a time. That makes it easier to turn, gives you a little bit of control. So, you know, I might just put it in this far for a start. If you ever wanted to sample some honey but actually not harvest it all, you could just put it in that 1/2 inch or, you know, 10 mil, whatever measurement system you use, and just get, wow, it'll still be a few tablespoons will come out. But for people who like to test whether their honey is actually below 18% moisture, that's one way to do it, particularly in areas where people have honey that crystallizes easily. So for example, in the UK, what they call rapeseed honey, or we call it canola. There's a variety of trees that produce honey that crystallizes easily, and for those you might want to do an initial test by just inserting the key that little way, testing it, saying as soon as it's ready, bang, you'll want to harvest it. Anyway, there we go. It's pouring nicely into the jar. You know, I know, you know, Cedar's said we've had this out in the big wide world for 11 years, and before that we were 10 years in the making, but I still get a thrill out of watching that. I don't take it for granted. For some reason it's like still some sort of a miracle that we're able to do this. And certainly we found out we were the first in the world to ever be able to extract honey like this from a beehive without having to open the hive and disturb the bees. And there was a few spin-offs from being able to do that we didn't, you know, we hadn't thought about when we first did it. One was, there was a lot of course we did years and years of testing before we took it to the market 11 years ago. And many of the beekeepers that were testing it for us around the world were saying, you know what, this honey tastes really good. One guy said, this honey tastes just like biting into fresh honeycomb, but without the wax. And we thought, yeah, well, he's getting as excited as we are a little bit, you know. Everything's enhanced when you're excited. But turned out that with some tests with Queensland University that it was true that the honey coming from flow frames tastes fresher. You can taste the flowers more easily, and the taste is bright compared to even just ordinarily extracted honey, as we did for many years with a centrifugal extractor. So that was just something that means something to us now, but at the time we hadn't even occurred to us while we were developing this that the honey might taste better. There it is, just pouring out.
Look at that. So we got half a jar. Mine's ahead of yours, but it did start a little later, I guess. You started a little later.
And then look at that. I mean, one thing that I forgot to check, but probably has been done, is the hive sloped back? Now, I was brought up on hives that slope forward towards the entrance so that any rain goes out. But our entrance these days is quite different with a mesh floor and so on. And we slope it back so that the honey flows down these channels this way to the back here. And of course the bees don't care either way, which way it's sloped. It's just whatever hive you have, you'll be tilting it whatever way is appropriate. But I should have checked that before I operated the flow hive, just to make sure it was tilted back. And we do have little levels inserted in the woodware, so you can check with the bubble level that it does have the correct slope backwards so that it drains properly. And so this honey, just slightly thicker than the honey from the hive that Cedar's opened, just flowing that much more slowly, and anyway, and it's a different colour. And that's another aspect to the taste of the honey, is that in each of these flow frames the bees will have more or less separated the honey, so I can be pretty sure that this is honey from one floral source. I'm not sure which one. You're going to want to have a guess. But you can see the different colours on the back, and you can see the different colours even in this. This is a darker honey than the one from Cedar. So you're getting what's called monofloral, that is one flower honey. So you're getting to taste the difference between all the different flora that you have in the countryside when you have a flow hive. And of course you could get the pollen check to check which honey it actually is. There'll be pollen in that honey from that tree, and therefore you could get to know the tastes of all of the flora in your area if you want.
It's amazing, I never get sick of joining the dots between the honey flavour and what is flowering.
Yeah.
And the flow hive really helps you do that because of that way, as Stu was saying, being able to isolate the different flavours as they come in. For those that are just joining us, we're doing a 2-hour live stream today. We're going to be covering harvesting honey, installing a nucleus, which is the very starting point and probably the easiest way to start your flow hive. We're also going to be using the super lifter and having a close-up look at the bees with the macro lens, so stay tuned for all of that. Now, the jars are filling up nicely. If we're going to walk away, it's always a good idea to cover them up. You want to keep an eye. You don't want to end up with a jar full of bees if the bees are a bit hungry. However, they seem quite fine now. I'm happy to go ahead and take you down to the nuke install. But before we do that, do we have a question or two coming in, Trace?
Yes, now Stu, because we've got Dad here today, he's got the microphone. So many people tuning in, and I have to say to Josh that he's from Texas, but that's that song which I love. But one of the things, Stu, a bit of a question for you, the hive that you're harvesting, people have spotted a few ants racing around there.
They would have seen me cleaning them.
Yeah, and on the quay. So just wondering, is it a problem and what can you do about that?
You know, it's a problem for the humans but not for the bees. The bees won't let the ants inside the hive. But for us it's just sort of messy, and as you saw I was cleaning ants off my hands. They don't really matter, but we do have in the flow hive kit little ant
Guards.
You know, they stop the ants coming up the legs. But of course, if it's like many hives, there's foliage rubbing up against the hive. The ant guards can't work if there's another pathway, and that's what's happened here. And basically it's happened because Well, it's nicer to not have ants. It's not a critical thing by any means. And so in this case there are ants and it doesn't really matter.
Fantastic. And then Stu, just on your jar that you've got there, just wondering what that cover is that you've put on it to stop the bees from going in. What actually
Well,
is that?
this is that waxed wrap. It's a cloth soaked in beeswax that people use to wrap their food in the fridge and so on. And which is fine to use. It sort of works well because it crimps and holds its shape around the edge of the jar. But you can use a bit of netting. You can use that thin cling wrap if you want. Some people have made up a special cap that fits the top of their jar. It has the hole and they've put an elbow in the tube and so on. There's plenty of ways to do this. This is just very convenient and easy. And so in some areas, for example in Victoria, I think there's some sort of rule, if not law, about having exposed honey around a beehive. You're not, and there's a good reason for not having exposed honey around a beehive, because in times when there's what beekeepers call a dearth, that is not enough nectar, the bees are very, very hungry and they're looking around, and if it was a dearth time now, there'd be bees sniffing around here wanting to get into that honey. If quite a few did get into that, that starts to put the bees themselves, the whole colony, into a robbing mode. So rather than going out to the flowers and pollinating and bringing back pollen and nectar, they'll start to rob from other hives. You don't want that to happen, and that's the reason why it's best not to have uncovered honey when the bees are hungry. You can see right now no bees have come at all around here or on the other hive, and that's just because they're busy. It's amazing. Like Cedar said, it's winter here, but there's enough flowers out that they're keen and they're filled, the flow frames, with honey up the top there.
All right, we're going to grab the caddy here along with the smoker. This is kind of a neat little toolbox we put together just to keep things neat. And the key things you do need to do your beekeeping are your bee suit, always have your gloves handy, you want your smoker, and you need this Hive tool. Now, that said, let's grab this. We're going to wander this way and light the smoker, and we can show you how to do that. Then we're going to go down and install the nucleus in the bottom row here, just to show you how to start from scratch. So for those that are just tuning in, today we're going to go through a honey harvest, then a nucleus install, then we're going to show you how to do a brood inspection with the super lifter, and then some macro bee footage for you when my sister arrives with her macro camera. Okay, so lighting a smoker, there's more than one way to light a smoker. If you're using garden mulch like this, it is a bit dense. Some people just roll up cardboard and light that, and that can be easier. But basically, our smokers have an inner basket, which can be handy, and sometimes you'll see us even lighting through the bottom here. So let's give that a go. We've only got the small blowtorch today, but let's see. Another simple, easy way to light it is just to build up the fire a little bit at a time. But let's light the smoker through the bottom here and see what happens. So that's just a nice little ad with these particular smokers that we have, where you've got an inner basket. And then once that fire is going there, what you want to do is just give it a little bit of oxygen. And when it's really blowing, and you put that to the windward side, you can see that's really helping, just with the little breeze coming through here. You can put it in. Now if you're new to beekeeping, wear your gloves. This does get very hot, you don't want to burn yourself. And there you can see the smoker is now going. As you get more experience, you can experiment if you want to without wearing gloves. And if you are going to do that, giving your hands a little bit of smoke will mask your mammal smell. And that will mean, hopefully, the bees don't give you a sting on the hand. Now as the smoker gets going, we will add more and more fuel, because that way it'll last longer. Now a mistake is you pack it too tight too soon, and we all do it even when you've got a lot of experience, and then you end up with your smoker going out. But there we go, smoker's going nicely. What we'll do is we'll wander down and show you how to install the nucleus and get started with a flow hive. So if you've got questions, put it in the comments and we'll get to answering those. And it's always good to do a few puffs on your smoker as you are walking, just to keep it going. Now here we have a typical little nuke box. Some people call it a nuc. It's spelled N-U-C, short for nucleus. And it's a going little mini hive, and they typically look like this. They're put together by a beekeeper or bee breeder simply by taking some of the frames out of the bottom box of another hive and putting them into this little box complete with a queen, and that makes it easy for you to transport this to your location. Now the important thing to do is actually to situate this where you want your flow hive to be, and we've got lots of information on where and why you want to consider situating your hive. You might be considering the pets, you might be considering flight paths, which is probably the main one for us. If you've got a choice between full sun or full shade, then put it in full sun, because that helps keep things like chalk brood, which is a spore producing pathogen that can get into the brood nest, and putting it in the sun will help keep that one away. So there's only a small little colony, and almost forgot to keep my smoker puffing there. Let's see, there it's going again. Some nice big puffs, so we'll get it going. Now we can put a couple of puffs in. The entrance is all you'll need for a tiny little box like this, and always a good idea to leave your smoker close by the entrance. Now if it was a fire prone area, it's been very wet at the moment, so I'm not worried, but putting it down on, say, a metal garbage bin lid would be a great practice, so that your smoker doesn't set fire to the leaves on the ground. So the aim of the game is to transfer this little colony, which is a going little hive, complete with a queen, complete with honey and brood and everything a little hive needs. We're basically going to open this lid and transfer them to this hive. But we have to think about the orientation of the bees. They've been coming and going from this spot, which means we actually want to shift this over now and put the hive in its place. So the flow hive will go here. We move this aside in case the bees have been here a while and orientated to this location. So we'll do that now, but we want to make sure we protect ourselves by putting on our bee suit hood and making sure you're doing up all of the zips. So you've got the center one, then you've got the two side ones. And don't forget the Velcro in the middle. Okay, so next we can take off the lid of the nuke box, and that's when we'll get a look in and see what's going on. In this case, it's coming off easily, and what we see is a lot of bees, which is fantastic. Always have a quick look in case the queen is on the lid there. I can see she's not. I can see lots of newly emerged bees here, which is a good sign that there's a brood nest here, and the bees are emerging from that comb, or from the brood cells. Okay, so next thing we're going to do, and we could have done this first, is just move that over here, and that way we can put the flow hive, and the bits you'll need to assemble first is your base, your brood box, your frames and your roof. You can save the super till later if you want to, but you'll need all of these components you see here in order to install the nucleus. Now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frames there, which means we need to take 5 frames out of here. We can put these aside, keep them in the shed for later. You might be doing a swarm catch or something like that. Now you'll notice that these are foundationless frames. You can put plastic foundation or wax with wire support foundation in these frames if you want to. I choose to go foundationless because I enjoy watching the bees just draw the natural comb themselves. These frames are never going in a centrifuge, so we don't need the foundational support in here to spin them in a high-speed centrifuge. That gives us a great advantage to be able to just let the bees draw the comb themselves and keep it perfectly natural down here in the brood nest. Now, put your questions in the comments below. We'll get to answering those shortly, but what we're going to do is transfer these frames into this box. Now, a little bit of smoke where you're going to be using your hive tool is a nice idea because it moves the bees out of the way. Next, we have a look and see what frame we want to pull out first. So let's choose this one here and see what that looks like. So using the J end of the tool, we're coming up like that, grabbing hold of the end bar, and then the other side like this, and here we have lots of lovely brood. This little nuke is going to absolutely explode when all of those cells emerge into newborn little bees ready to take on the chores of the hive. So you can see here, this is the brood. So that is the capped brood where worker bees are going through their metamorphosis, growing their wings and their eyes and their legs and everything they need to be an incredible little worker bee, able to fly up to 10 kilometers or 6 miles away, beating their wings at 240 times a second, go and collect that nectar and that pollen and bring it back to the hive. Okay, so I noticed that the bees just gave me a little warning hit then. So you're always tuning in, listening to the bees, and when they do that, a little extra smoke doesn't go astray, just to keep them in a calm mood. So for those that are just tuning in, we're installing a nuke or nucleus hive, and we're installing the nucleus from this little box here over to our flow hive, and that's probably the easiest way to start. There's all sorts of ways to get started in beekeeping, but ordering a nucleus from a beekeeper or bee breeder is probably the easiest way to go. And all we're going to do is transfer them to this hive here. Now, often we get a question, do you checkerboard the frames? So checkerboarding the frames means you'd put the blank ones in between these ones. Now, if you're still getting cold nights, you don't want to do that. You want to keep the brood nest together. And we're still certainly getting cold nights here. We're a little early, but spring is around the corner for us here. So we want to show you how to install a nucleus into your flow hive. So we're just going to keep it in the same order. We're going to keep it all together. If I noticed that there was one frame on the edge that was all honey, I might decide to put a blank one in between. But keep the frames with brood on them all together, and that's the safest thing to do. Some beekeepers might decide checkerboarding is the thing to do, but they'll only do that if the temperatures are nice and warm. Now there's the queen there. That's nice to see. She's got a blue dot on her, which is typical. If you're purchasing a nuke, that the bee breeder has marked the queen. Makes it easier to find, and you can also use the color code to work out which year she was raised. Okay, fantastic, because the queen can live for up to 6 years, which is extraordinary considering it's the same genetics as the worker bees. She just was fed royal jelly for her entire larvae stage, and that meant she turned into a queen and lives for potentially 6 years instead of 6 weeks. So royal jelly must be extraordinary stuff. Okay. Now all we're doing is picking these up, marvelling at the bees, having a good little look. There's pollen resources on here as well. Have a look at these colours. I don't know if you can see down the cells, give us a thumbs up if you can. All of the colours of bee bread, which is basically pollen they've brought back, pushed into the cells with their heads, added their enzymes and special sauce, let it ferment into a nice bee bread, and that is the primary food for the young developing larvae of those worker bees. Okay, here we go. So there's only one more frame to go in, and then we'll get to questions. Okay, any questions coming through, Trace?
Yes, Seeds, and this is one we get a bit like people often, they get their nuke or nucleus, however you say it, and then they're wondering how long, so say the brood box, they haven't quite got it ready, how long could you keep the bees in that box for before you need to transfer them?
Okay, great question, because they are actually a self-contained mini little hive. Now, the reason why you might want to transfer them sooner rather than later is they might outgrow their little nuke box. So you can leave them for weeks or potentially months, but probably a few weeks will be fine depending on the season. But what you want to watch out for if you're leaving them in this little box for a while is them outgrowing their box with a massive bee beard. You may risk the hive deciding to swarm and dividing itself, and half the bees fly off if you don't install them into your brood box, if they are building up like that. So that's the reason why you want to transfer it, and the reason why a nucleus is probably the easiest way to get started is you simply take that home and put it where you want to situate the hive, and then it's on your terms when you choose to transfer them into your flow hive brood box. If you order a package of bees, which is just the bees without the frames, you have to do it that very day. So that's a little less convenient. And if you catch a swarm, obviously you're catching it on that day and transferring them directly to your hive. Another way to get started is taking a split from somebody else's hive, which is basically what's happened here. A beekeeper's taken frames out of another hive along with a queen, and that, or they can often raise their own queen if they've got eggs down the cells, and that work has been done for you if you purchase a nucleus off a bee breeder. Okay, so I know the queen's in there because she saw it. Now you've got a choice here. You can either shake the remaining bees in, or if you just leave them at the front here, they'll go in on their own terms. So we can just leave that nuke box there, and they will wander up there when they are ready. Now we have, this is an 8 frame Langstroth box which matches our flow frame 6 because flow frames are a bit wider for extra honey storage. So we're going to be putting the 8th frame in like that. Always put all of the frames in. If you leave frames out, what you're going to have is free-form comb, which is a bit of a mess to clean up because you can't pull the frames out to inspect them. And you need to be able to pull the frames out, which is why we have organised the bees into these nice frames, because it makes it manageable to inspect the brood nest. Now a little tip here is push all of the frames together like this. Now they are just giving me another little warning there. So often they'll give you a little hit on the hand to say hey, out of our brood nest, but a little bit of smoke usually calms them down again. So we want to share that excess space out between the two sides. Now if you think it's too much space, then what we find is you'll really appreciate that later. As the end bars get more and more sticky and the comb gets thicker and fatter, you'll appreciate that extra space. And in the beginning, just share it evenly between the two sides. And that's it. You've successfully installed your nucleus into your flow hive. Look after them and they'll grow. Only add the top box when the bees have put their comb in every single frame. and there's a lot of bees in the box, and of course a season ahead with flowers. Okay, next we'll be putting on the inner cover just like that, and then the gabled roof on top of that, and that's it. That's how easy it is to install a nucleus into your Flow Hive brood box, and you can enjoy watching them come and go. And in terms of inspecting the brood nest, have a look in a couple of weeks and see how they're going, and that can be a beautiful thing to watch them draw their natural comb. And you can seize an opportunity there if they start going wonky off the comb guide, just to bump them back online. And that's why it's good to inspect often as they're building out those frames, so you can catch that early and get their naturally drawn comb nice and straight within that brood frame. Any questions coming through?
Yes, it's like you've just put this hive on, and it's people are thinking it's concrete. I think they're actually Hebel blocks that this hive is sitting on. Jock's wondering, could you just put it on the ground or on rocks, or does it have to be on like a platform like this?
Okay, we'll put them on a platform here because this area gets a lot of weeds and a lot of growth, and it just makes it a bit easier to manage. But yes, we have designed the Flow Hive base with 4 legs like this. What we have found is that once the hive gets heavy, those legs can sink into the ground, upsetting the level of the hive. So if you don't want to use something like this, then as you see up in the garden up here, we've put just a brick or a paver under each foot, and that just makes sure that it's not going to sink into the garden as that hive gets very heavy when it's full of honey. Keep the questions coming in. Today we're covering quite a lot. It's a 2-hour live stream. We've been harvesting honey up there, which we'll go and have a look at shortly. Now we've installed a nucleus into this little hive here, and we're also going to be showing you the super lifter. So stay tuned for the brood inspection of a well advanced and established hive that's been there for years under the mango tree.
Just while you're on this one, Sage, we've got Sharon's asking, is with this hive, is it already tilting to the back, and is that what the levels are doing, or do you have to tilt it before you harvest it?
So the way we've set it up is that you can wander up with your jar, turn the handle, and the honey goes out without having to mess around with leveling the hive. And that, I think, is the best way to manage it, and that's the way we've designed the hive. So all you need to do, come and have a look at this. You've got a level in the side, you want the level bubble right in the middle, and that is the perfect 3-degree backward slope for honey harvesting. And we just leave it at that slope all the time, which is different than conventional beekeeping, where you've often got a flat bottom board where you don't want water building up on that conventional bottom board, and therefore you'd be sloping it towards the entrance. We've counter sloped the landing board and the ramp of the screened mesh floor, and what that means is rain is less likely to go in. When it does, if you've got a lot of driving wind driving the rain in, it'll go through the screen bottom into the tray, so it's not actually keeping the bees wet inside. So we can leave the whole hive on that 3-degree slope for honey harvesting all the time, and that way you don't need to mess around with it when you're going to harvest. And on the back we've got another level in this nice little vented cover here, which is the level in the side to side direction. You want that fairly central. The reason why that is useful is when the bees are drawing natural comb, you want it to go straight down and not wander off onto another adjacent comb or frame. You can imagine if it was slopey like that, then the comb would be going with gravity, not with the slope of the hive, and that would make it a little bit tricky later. You've also got ventilation control there. Put the vents down. We'll actually close off ventilation, which I'm going to do now because we've got a small colony in a big box, and still getting cold nights, so we don't want to let them get too cold. You've also got your pest management tray. Down the bottom here which would be a clever idea to put some cooking oil in that, and that way you can catch some of the annoying hive beetles that have been decimating a lot of hives in our area. So that's just a brand new tray. You can put some cooking oil in there, and any hive beetles getting chased around by the bees will fall down into that oil and perish. So that can make a great hive beetle trap. And a little tip there, press the rear vented cover in against the frame so that bees can't get up between that and into the tray. Okay, that's our nuke install. Any more questions?
Yeah, Vina's asking, Cedar, what happens, and people ask this one a lot actually, what happens if you do put that super box on and your brood box isn't quite ready?
Okay, so if you put the super on and the brood box isn't quite ready, what you'll be doing is making it a little bit harder to warm the brood nest to the correct temperature, which is about 36 degrees C, just below our body temperature. Now, that will really only matter if you have still cold nights ahead. So if you've put it on a bit early, no big deal if it's a warm time of the year. But otherwise, it's just a good practice to make the hive the right size for the bees. So there's a small colony, then keep them in just a small box until they really breed up, and then put your super full of your flow frames on top when they are ready to expand into it, which is when they have used all of the frames here. They've got their drawn comb in each frame, and there's a lot of bees in there.
Oh, great. Now, Hamish is wondering, like, do you need to do a course? Is there anything that you need to do before starting a flow hive? And of course we have our the beekeeper.org course, but what would you recommend, Seeds?
Okay, so you can go either way. Basically, depending on what type of learner you are. Some people like to read every book under the sun, do every online course, and go and do a beekeeping course before they start beekeeping. Others just like to jump straight into it. I'm the type of person that likes to jump into it. Life's an adventure. I like learning along the way. However, we do have a lot of resources for you, because we really, I guess, kind of by accident, we were inventing the flow frames thinking they would be for existing beekeepers, but what we found is half of the people coming were actually brand new to beekeeping. So we started creating a lot of educational material. So we've got 10 years of videos like this, and we have a dedicated online course at thebeekeeper.org, which gets rave reviews, is free to try, and also an amazing fundraiser. So if you do want an online beekeeping course that's made to take you from the very beginning right through to a deep knowledge in beekeeping, have a look at thebeekeeper.org. And that's a collaboration with experts from all over the world creating high quality training content. So if you've got, long winters, knee deep in snow, then we've got beekeepers showing you how to prepare your hives for that. And we have scientists on there going right into honey flavours or medicinal properties and all sorts of interesting things. So that's a really good one to look at. We've also got our new book, Flow Hive's Book of Bees and Beekeeping, if you're the type of person that loves to read a book. But what I recommend, and we often hear beekeepers say, why didn't I do this 20 years ago, is to just get started. So jump in, get your equipment, get your bees, and enjoy the process of looking after them. We need more beekeepers at the moment here in Australia to look after more hives, because we've had the hit of Varroa really decimating a lot of beehives, and that sort of wave is spreading out. We're past the big build-up phase where we are, and things are relatively back to normal, but aside from making sure those Varroa numbers are low from time to time and making sure you're trapping the beetles. But if you're further north from here, getting absolutely hammered at the moment by the hive beetles and Varroa kind of working in tandem. So point being, we do need more beekeepers really looking after their hives to keep up enough bees to then make sure we have enough to do all of the pollination in the area. I'm hearing stories from around Australia where the varroa has come in. We've lost a lot of colonies. People are hand pollinating their vegetable gardens. So we don't want that. We want to keep up this keystone species that humans have really become intertwined with now with their agriculture. Okay, so we're going to go up and have a look at our honey harvest, and then we will get out the super lifter and show you how to use that invention, and hopefully we'll be doing some macro bees as well. So stay tuned.
See, it's just that you're mentioning we're going up to that super lifter. We've had someone tune in and say, you know, how heavy does the box get? So why would we need a super lifter?
Okay, honey is very heavy. It's heavier than water, and each frame itself will weigh about 4 kilograms. And if you've got 7 frames of honey in a single super there, then you've got 28 kilograms of honey plus the box. So that's getting quite heavy, and it becomes a little bit of a barrier. You want to do your brood inspection, have a look in here, but the thought of muscling off that heavy box and chiseling it off is limiting you from really getting into your brood nest. And we found that that was a sticking point for beekeepers. So we spent years developing a simple little lifter that allows you to attach it onto the hive and open the box like a box. So my father, Stuart, is going to show you how to do that now. Here's a smoker for you.
Thank you.
And I'll hand the baton over in a second. We're just going to now put on the audio bug, and we're going to wander up here to this hive under the mango tree that's been under there for a couple of years. And look at that, 2 beautiful jars of honey. While we've been doing something else, the honey has been flowing out of the hives itself. And that's exactly what we invented it for, is can't we do this in an easy, gentle way and without spilling the honey jars?
Which I just did.
Okay, so up here under the mango tree is where we're going, and we will
Yikes.
now add a little bit of smoke to this hive. So this hive's in a little wicking bed in a boat. Of course, you don't need to put it in a boat, but it's a fun little thing to have hives in gardens. So here we've created this little wicking bed. If I just do a few puffs right in the entrance and leave this smoker right there, the returning foragers will hopefully get into a calmer mood. This hive is known for being a little more territorial, so I'll leave it to you, Stu.
Yeah, for those that have just joined, this is a 2-hour special of our usual much shorter Facebook Live, weekly Facebook Live that Cedar usually does, but it's fun for me to join it now and then. And so we have demonstrated harvesting honey with a flow hive, and that's still happening. And Cedar's been demonstrating adding a nuke, transferring your bees from a small box called a nuke to the hive itself. So now I'm going to demonstrate this super lifter. So for those that don't know beekeeping very well, generally a beehive is made of 2 boxes, maybe 3 or 4. The bottom box or boxes will be brood. That's where the queen's laying the eggs. They're turning into little pupa and larvae and then turning into bees. So it's the brood, the nursery. And the top box is where, or the upper boxes is where the bees will be storing their honey. And that's the way the bees like it. The honey on top, their brood below. And they'll tend to organise themselves like that. In most hives that people do, they have a thing called a queen excluder. You can just see this strip here. We'll see that when we open it up. But basically, when you're looking after the health of your hive, you want to be able to inspect the brood. You want to be able to pull the frames out, which is what we'll be doing. And to do that, you have to lift off this top box. Now, if it's early in the season or you've harvested or whatever, then this top box It's still heavy, but it's okay. But once it's got even half full of honey, it's quite a weight. Honey is 1.5 times as heavy as water, and so this gets very, very heavy to lift off, and it's an awkward lift, and you don't want to squash the bees, and there's no shortage of beekeepers with injured backs and poor backs, including me. But because we want people to easily be able to inspect their bees, and it's so good to inspect the brood and find the queen and see how they're going health-wise, then Cedar and I worked for 8 or 9 years on a way to get this heavy top box off more easily than the traditional just lifting it off and putting it off to the side. Finally, we developed what we call the super lifter, because this is called the super and it lifts it. All right, so here it is here in its little bag, carry bag. I'm sort of doing it to demonstrate. You usually do this just flat on the ground. That's the super lifter folded up. If I grab these top handles, it sort of transforms itself into this shape. Now, before you can use this, you need to put these little, what we call, what do we call them? They're load point screws. So they're special screws with a shaped head that screw all the way in. They're very easy to replace the existing flow screws, or to put them on a normal, this will fit a normal Langstroth hive. The super lifter will also fit larger hives such as the UK National or the European National and the Dedant hive. So there's a lot of different sized beehives around the world. We've tried to make sure this will work on any of them. But those load point screws have to be screwed in. In this case, 2 on the brood box here and 2 on the super. And there might be some in the front. Let me see. Yeah, there are some on the front, because if you want, you can use these handles that attach to the front. We might do that just for demonstration's sake, although for a single box you don't necessarily need the handles, but it makes it that much, the handles make it that much easier again. So here it is. I pulled it out. It's sort of folded out into a weird looking shape, but if you look, you'll see there's 2 dangling bits here. Now they're the lower brackets, and they attach to the load point screws on the brood box. There they go. You hope that, oh, what's happened here is that has been unscrewed for a shelf, and so is now getting in the way. Bad planning. Will this go over it? Probably not. Okay, so what I need to do is get a little tool to screw that back in again. So while someone's grabbing me one of those, unless I've got one in my pocket. My pocket's full of all sorts of things, but not one of those. So sorry for that delay. The super lifter is going to attach here and lift this box, and it's going to lift it back this way. You can leave the roof itself on, or you can pull it off. It doesn't really matter. In this case, let's take it off. Like I said, it can do either. Well, let's see if there's one of those. Nope. All right. So great. Thank you very much. These are the tools that get supplied with the flow hive, and they've got the square drive for these screws. And all that's happened here is that we've left these screws sticking out from when a shelf bracket was attached to it for harvesting. So sorry, that was a bit of a hassle, but we've fixed that up now. So now this is ready to attach. This is where we were up to, and those lower brackets on the super lifter are attaching to the brood box. This is going to turn in and become a leg, but at the moment it's just lying not used, because the next stage is to take what was handles and turn them into brackets as well. Now they fold up upwards and they click onto the upper load point screws on each side. Now if I lift this mechanism here, you can watch these slide into place, lock in. Now I'm not going to lift it any more than that, because guess what happens next? This is going to come apart. So at this point, even though everything seems all relaxed, the next point the hive's going to open. So I'm going to zip my suit up, put my hood on. Sorry for the zip noise on the microphone. So when you know your bees, you might even be working them without putting a suit on at all. But when you don't know the hive or you're inexperienced, best to have a suit, particularly for covering your face. You can see I'm going to leave my hands bare, and again that's your choice. But if these bees got a bit feisty, I would still go and put gloves on, because after a few, you don't want that many stings. Most people get more and more used to stings, like me, and so they're like an annoying bother now. It's not a very strong sensation anymore, strong hurt. Okay, here we are. Where was that smoker? We've already given them a puff of smoke, and we'll give them one more. You can if you like, thank you. Plenty. Yep, that's plenty. They just need a puff or two. So now the bees, they calm down with the smoke. So that now these screws, the top brackets are starting to lock in these screws, and make sure these bottom screws are still locked on. And this is the point which I'm lifting here, and also starting to lift here with my right hand. And watch what happens. This is quite well glued together, but it doesn't matter how strongly the bees have glued it together with their propolis, the super lift is strong enough to break it. We tried it with some very, very glued together hives, of course. Did you see what I did then? I'm holding this up. If I lifted this anymore, I'll be lifting the whole hive. So there's that point where you can just feel it's got to its limit. And then I'm sliding the leg down and locking, it automatically locks. Now that forms a lovely stable triangle table. Of course this can happen very, very quickly. This could have happened all within 30 seconds, but I'm going slowly, stage by stage for you. This leg needs to be tucked right in. It swings, it needs to be tucked in as far as it'll go. There's a stop in there so that it's firm. So there's the hive, the super sitting up. Now sometimes the frames, the brood frames that are in here, are stuck, and quite often they're stuck to the queen excluder and to the frames above. The super lifter makes it so easy to get in there with your hive tool and lever them down. It used to be that, I was holding that up with one hand and levering them down with the other. Another great way to put your back out. So because that was so well. Okay, so there they are. It's open. The bees are happy. I'm going to attach these at the front, which is something you can do now, or you might have done before. They come folded up like that, but then they click together. So they're weird looking things, but they click onto exactly the same screws that we've used at the rear of the hive. They click on to screws that are already there on the front of the hive. Now here I am, experienced beekeeper, standing straight in front of my entrance, which is absolutely fine for an experienced beekeeper. But the bees will start banging into me. You'll see them sort of saying, hey, what's happened? My flight path's been blocked. And so if you're not experienced, then stand off to the side rather than right in front of the entrance. So the super lifter, what I just did before, has cracked the propolis all the way, except possibly on this back. I don't know if it's cracked it here or not, and I might be needing this hive tool for the final little bit. We'll just see what happens. No, it's cracked it. So there, now you can see that action. It's very easy for me to lift, but of course I've got to get into the boat with this particular setup. I've got to stand up here and just bring it over. In this case, the queen excluder is going up with the top box. That's the way cedar loves it. Personally, I prefer the queen excluder to stay below, but on there, but it doesn't really matter. But what that means, because it has come up with the super, is that the queen could be here. So the first thing you do is just have a good look at the bottom of this queen excluder to see if the queen's there. Can't see her, but I have noticed the bees are quite calm and them just crawling around. But also I'm having a look here. You know, like a few months ago I was beekeeping with a friend in South Australia, and she looked up and said, well, what's this on my veil here? And to my surprise, there was the queen bee sitting right in the middle of her veil, no other bees around it. Around her, she was just there. I picked her up and put her back in, but I'd never seen that before. So there's always something new in beekeeping. So now we've lifted this up. The queen excluder can stay there. It doesn't matter, or you can pull it off if you want to have a look at it, because the brood frames, which are the ones you generally want to look at, are all exposed and ready to lift. So that's the demonstration of the opening of the super lifter. You can see how convenient it is, just pushing it back. Once we've got another little bit of kit here that goes with the super lifter, and that's these frame rests. And there's lots of frame rests on the market, you know, and they sit here. These ones are designed to work with the super lifter. So in other words, if you want a frame rest there, you need one that sort of zigzags around the super lifter. So there they are. Now I'm looking down, it's well stocked with bees and they're quite calm. And I'm looking at which frame comes out the most easily, which has the least what's called cross comb or burr comb on it, so that when I bring it up, it's not tearing into the comb isn't sort of clashing and tearing the comb on the facing frames, if that makes sense. And it's hard to see, so I'm just going to go for this one. So just loosening it a bit there, loosening it a bit there. I've got to watch time, haven't I, with this broadcast, because there's plenty of things to show you, including going back to the original honey harvest with cedar.
Yeah, well, Stu, we're actually doing okay on time. We've got about an hour left.
Oh, good.
So we got plenty of time.
So Lauren was just letting me know that we're doing fine for time. All right. First to see the queen gets a jar of honey. So just looking at that, even with the bees all over it, you can still see brood. That's fairly mature brood. It's already, a lot of it's hatched out, so there's plenty of holes. It's the sort of brood that you'd expect in the winter, because they're not trying to build up their numbers as much now. You still see some bees wandering around with pollen. I'm going to be storing that pollen. Now I'm going to look at my side now with flow frames, and with the brood frames in a flow hive, you try to keep them vertical all the time. So if you want to look at the other side, you'll do that. See that? So that it always stays vertical. I'm doing it so that we can look at that side together. And there's a lot more brood there, and that's all worker brood, surrounded by honey on the edges, which is typical. The honey, of course, it's stored there for their use, but it's also helping to keep the temperature stable. Honey is a great thermal mass, and they want to keep this brood at roughly 35-36 degrees Celsius, pretty much the same as our blood heat. And that's why you tend to open hives on a warmer day, and certainly not a cold, windy day. They don't like it because they can't keep their brood at the correct temperature. And for the bees, that means their brood could die. So they're looking great. Again, I'm going to shake them off now, which means there'll be bees everywhere, but just so that you can have a proper look. So that's just a quick, sharp shake like that. So it's a bit easier to see the brood then. How much is there? There's a lot of young larvae in there, and it's looking reasonably well fed. You can see the food glistening around it. And on the other side, plenty of brood. So this hive's very, very healthy. I'm also looking for signs of American foul brood, notifiable disease here in Australia, European foul brood, similar, but not as common. And of course I'm looking out for the queen, and I can't see her. So there we go. So that we've just had a look at the first frame. The frame rests allow us to put that frame off to the side. And that gives me plenty of room to push frames apart, so that when I'm lifting these next frames out, see, I'm just levering it apart, there's plenty of room to lift it up. And again, have another look. So here, straight away, we can see there's a queen cell in the centre of the comb. So they're beginning to raise queens to maybe be a spare. This means we're going to keep an eye on this hive in terms of its numbers, because at some point, maybe in a month or so, it'll be wanting to swarm, and which is very, very early. But I had a friend who lives not very far away, had a hive swarm just 2 days ago, midwinter. So crazy times.
And what causes a hive to swarm?
So Lawrence just asked what. They can hear you?
Yeah, I've got a mic on.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
What causes a hive to swarm? Well, it's a bit like saying to a human, what causes a human to want to breed and have babies? That's what they do to expand them, you know, their numbers. And so hives want to swarm because that's how they multiply, how they breed up. And so, in a way, a beekeeper's interested in what stops a hive from swarming, because they'll naturally swarm. They'll build up their honey stores, they'll build up their numbers till half of the colony can leave and start a new colony. And sometimes they'll swarm several times in a season. So, one hive is then producing 2, 3, 4 hives, 4 more colonies, if they're going well and if there's the space for them in that environment. So therefore, good honey, a good nectar flow, so there's plenty of food. The hive's already quite crowded, and it looks like that nectar flow is going to continue. The 2 main things you're looking for that are very, very likely to cause the hive to swarm, but just crowdedness is enough. If they're just feeling crowded, and that's so so I've pointed out this queen cell. I could scrape that queen cell off. They would replace that within a day. It doesn't have an egg or a queen in it now. It's hollow. It's just waiting. But so some beekeepers try to stop swarming by going in every few days and scraping all the queen cells off, which just becomes impossible. If you miss it for a week, suddenly they've swarmed, because they will sometimes swarm without even having a queen in left. So the old queen will head off with the swarm, and they'll be trusting that they'll be raising new queens for the remaining colony, the half that stayed behind. So crowdedness, good weather, good conditions, they'll swarm. Typically the way we prevent swarming is by splitting the hive. So this hive's getting to the stage where it's ready to be split into 2. And there's plenty of beekeepers around here who'd like another hive. We've got plenty here, so we might be saying, oh, we're pretty ready to give you a nucleus. Now, Cedar demonstrated a nucleus hive. It just got 4 or 5 of these frames, queen and the bees. It's a basics of a new hive. So we would split it into a nuke box probably, or we could split it into a whole big box, depending on what's happening with the nectar flow at the time. And that stops swarming. There's a few other techniques too. I'm not going to go into them now, but it is something to learn as a beekeeper, how to stop your bees from swarming, because you're losing them. You're losing half your colony. And if you're living in an urban area with neighbours each side, people get scared of swarms. They're what, are there 10,000, maybe 15,000 or more bees flying, making an incredible buzz, looking for a new home, and it's scary. Even though they're not looking for humans in particular, it's still a scary sight. And so you don't want your bees swarming in an urban area. You should be doing all you can to stop it, which is, as I said, mainly splitting them. So look, we're not doing a full inspection today, we're sort of demonstrating the super lifter. So I'm going to pop these frames back, which means just making sure these are squeezed back in place. Take the frame and just ease it back in. So they're calm at the moment, they're crawling over my skin and it's fine. It's absolutely amazing thing to have your hands right in the heart of a super organism. That's what a beehive is. It's a super organism. There might be 40 or 50,000 bees here, but they work as one, including they democratically decide where their new home's going to be. So even though if we looked, we would find the queen bee. She's not really the ruler. It's not actually an accurate name for her to call her the queen. So anyway, so I'll take these frame rests off for the moment because I'll demonstrate folding the super lifter back down again. We've got a little magnetic clip.
Hey Stu, while we're kind of on the subject of swarming a little bit, I've got a question from a viewer. They said that their bees swarmed for the first time only 11 days later they swarmed again, but less than the amount that filled 2 frames. Is that normal for bees to swarm in such a small time frame?
It's not uncommon, but it's not a great strategy for those bees because, as they've mentioned, the second swarm is quite weak and vulnerable. It might survive, it might not, and it's the first swarm will be with the old queen. She's experienced, she knows what she's doing, she's been laying good quality bees because they're bred up. The second swarm will be with a queen that's brand new, and so she's sort of untested in terms of her breeding capabilities really, but the main thing is that it's a small group of bees. They're going to be really pushing it to make themselves into a strong, healthy hive, depending on the weather, and maybe they find a great home and it all works out for them. But yes, there are some bee hives that just seem to go into a swarming mode, and they'll do not 2 but 3, 4, 5 they'll throw off. And of course, by the time the 3rd, 4th, 5th swarm, they're really small. I've seen little swarms this big, and they're just too vulnerable. It's too hard for them to keep warm and everything. So that means that even if you want to keep your hive and it's swarming like that, you should think seriously about replacing the queen, because there's something about that stock, that DNA, where they're prone to swarming, and you don't really want that. I mean, of course, when you're looking at your beekeeping stock, you want them gentle, like these ones. You want them productive, of course, if you're keen on the honey. You want them hygienic. That's very, very important. So in other words, they know how to keep themselves healthy. They throw out disease before it becomes a problem. They groom themselves well and so on. And then don't swarm easily. All these properties. And of course, if you've got a number of hives, you can keep selecting and breeding from your best hives. But if you've only got 1 or 2, then you'll probably be importing queens one way or another. Maybe from neighbours who are breeding, or maybe from commercial queen breeders. Did that make sense?
Yeah, it did. Thanks, Stu.
So the queen excluder is still here. There's no point in taking it off because all we've got there is the bottom of the flow frames.
And what exactly does the queen excluder do again?
So the queen excluder keeps the queen. The queen's larger. Now maybe we should keep looking for her. The queen's larger, and she can't fit through the gaps of the queen excluder. All the worker bees can, but the drone bees, the male bees, and the queens can't fit through that gap. So that keeps the drones and the queen down in this section. They can't get up into the honey storage section. Generally the queen is not that interested in being in the honey storage section, so it's not a big deal. And drones certainly aren't that interested in it either. That's not where they'll hang out. They'll be hanging out ready to go on their mating flights whenever they can, or attempt to mate flights, I guess. So the idea is that no eggs get laid in the top, in the super, that it's just for storing honey, maybe pollen. And so therefore, when you're extracting, even with the flow frames or ordinary, conventional frames, you're not got bee pupa and bee larva and so on in with your honey extraction business. It's separate. The honey's there, the brood's there. So that's the idea. Some beekeepers prefer not to use queen excluders, and but only a some. And they've got their reasons, and that's one of the wonderful things about beekeepers is the huge variety of practices there are, even within one region, let alone all around the world, in terms of beekeeping. And another wonderful thing is how passionately beekeepers stand for their own idea of how it should be done. And so that's why you get these wonderful lively debates in beekeeping clubs about what should and shouldn't happen. It's really fun if you like that sort of thing. So now, you can see I'm holding onto the handle of the super lifter, and I'm ready to swing it back into place. It's going to land here, this area here is going to land here, and it's pretty free of bees, I can do that, but the rest of it will be standing up. Have a look. So here it goes. I'm using those handles, but if the handles weren't here, I would just be gripping it there. But this does have a little bit of weight in it. This is about, I would say, 2/3 full of honey by weight. And as I lower it down, I just make sure it's lined up. The handles help with that too. So now, well, another lovely advantage of the super lifter is that you're in control for this last part of lowering the super, the honey super, onto the box. Quite often you'll have bees spilling out everywhere, and you'll want to brush them away, usually people do, or use the smoker to push them away as you lower it, the last part. So the way that that's done is, again, you take the weight. Here I'm taking that with my right hand, which means that I can fold the leg up. So now my hand's holding that, and now, I don't know if that's easy to see, you can see that I've got the weight, and I can lower it down as slowly as I like. If the hive was closer to the ground, I could use this, what was a leg, as a sort of extended handle, and just drop it down. And there we go. It's dropped down. These top brackets will pop off their screws. So if you decide, oh no, I forgot to put the queen excluder in, or I just wanted to look at, if you decide you want to lift it again, make sure that they're popped back on again. Not hard, but, and I could lift it again. But here they are, they're popped off, they'll fold down, the leg tends to flop back there. I can grab these, they become handles again, and there it is, the super lifter, ready to be folded up and put in the bag. We can go through that operation again. I'm not sure what the best thing to do now is.
I think we can put it away. We've shown how easy it is, and I think there's a few more things we want to check out. But I've got a couple questions here for you, Stu, if we want to just take a few minutes and answer those. We're based on the north coast of New South Wales. It's beautiful here. We get pretty mild winters. But would you say there's an ideal climate to keep bees? We can keep them pretty much all over the world, but I've got a reader here, or a viewer here specifically from Singapore, where it's very hot and humid. So they're wondering if that's an ideal place to keep bees as well.
Well, what you do, we really encourage you, if you're a new beekeeper, to make contact with beekeepers in your area. Maybe you've got a friend of a friend that's a beekeeper, or you could join a club and get online and see if there's local people willing to help you, because it is a climate by climate, a region by region, area by area occupation. And so I wouldn't say there's an ideal. I think I wouldn't be surprised again if the beekeeper said, no, my climate's the ideal, and that is 3 months of intensive beekeeping and the rest of the time it's snow. You know, that's what it's like in northern Canada, for example, or northern Europe. And others will say, no, I love that. Well, this is the subtropics, so we get honey all year round. We don't get a proper brood break though. So when it's subtropical or tropical and the bees are breeding all year and you don't have a break, that makes it hard to manage some diseases, particularly varroa mite, that that work with fresh brood, with the larva and the pupa, and that grow there. When you have a brood break, that is no eggs being laid and no larva, no pupa, then it's harder for a pest like varroa to get hold, or it's a gap in its breeding as well. So, in other words, this is a very difficult question to answer, and people will have their ideas. I think fully tropical, like Singapore, there are some real challenges to beekeeping, but beekeepers manage it. And some people in tropical areas prefer to keep Aphis serrana, the Asian bee, but they're another story again. They do work with flow equipment, but they prefer a smaller hive. It's another form of beekeeping. Yeah, I can't tell. I mean, this is where we're saying consult people that are in your local area, because they'll be the experts in beekeeping for your climate.
Very good, thanks Stu.
All right.
Here's cedar,
So
cedar.
we're going to go back and have a look at our honey and harvest another jar to
Lovely.
to finish this off. If you don't mind, I'll grab that little microphone off you there, and we're going to wander down here and see how the honey's been harvesting while we've been doing the brood inspection over here with the super lifter. So here we have 2 flow hives, and we're just harvesting a single frame from each one, which is a beautiful thing, just to be able to see what the different frames are producing and whether the flavour is different between one and another. So what I'm going to do is show you again how to harvest some honey. Now, at the start of this live stream, we turn the key and the honey's now flowed out from our flow frame invention. And if you look in the window, there is plenty of honey coming in at the moment. The windows tell a story about what is going on in the surrounding area as the bees fly out, collect that nectar, and bring all of the different flavours and colours of honey back to your hive. So our invention, the flow frames and the flow hive, is designed to bypass what was a lot of equipment and a whole shed full of equipment and mess, which is what we used to do. And if you know conventional beekeeping, you know it well. You've got a centrifuge and a spinning machine, you've got stainless steel decapping benches, you've got the hot knife, you've got a whole lot of equipment, buckets and sieves and things to get to a beautiful product like this. And we came along and went, hang on a second, can't we just tap the honey straight out of the hive without having all of that equipment, all of that mess, and the expense that goes along with that as well. And here we are, 11 years in, with 150,000 flow hives all around the world, and it's just a beautiful thing to watch the honey pour out. Chime in, let us know where you are in the world and what types of honey flavours there are. And that's a real joy to me, is to harvest and taste all the different flavours from the surrounding area. Now, I'm going to pick another frame and let's see what we have next, and I'll show you how to harvest it. Now, I can see here in this window, and that's a beautiful example of capped honey, where the bees have put their wax capping on top of the cells to say that honey is ready to keep for the long term, and that is when you can harvest some and share some of the beautiful spoils that they produce. Not only are bees amazing for their pollination efforts, a hive like this could pollinate 50 million flowers in a day, and that's just insane. The maths is just incredible. And now in order to harvest the honey, now I'm choosing this edge frame here, I can just turn the key like this, and if I want to harvest a small amount, I'll just insert the key a little ways, and that's one of the versatile things you can do with a flow hive, is you can harvest a small amount or you can harvest a larger amount. Now, there we go, you do it in segments, it makes it easier, and the honey is already pouring out. Yum. That's wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting the paper bark, which is a rich multi-tone. This is more of a fruity one. It's an endless joy, is just really connecting the dots between the flowers and what's flowering around and the honey in the jar. Look at that, it's absolutely pouring out. And this is the frame we are harvesting, and you can see the bees standing on their wax capping like nothing really has happened. And you might even notice that a couple of bees starting the process of chewing the wax away, and what they do is they recycle all of that capping and coat all the flow frame parts, so your honey is sitting inside a little wax pocket that they've built onto our flow frame invention, and there it is, just streaming out. And have a look at the difference in colour between this and this. There's just a stark difference in the honey colour, and the flavour will be really different as well. So it's an exciting thing to me, and as we were talking about earlier, just the way you get different flavours from different frames, and you can then bring that story back to the table of all the different flavours from your surrounding area. You know, a lot of people think honey's just honey, it's the stuff on the supermarket shelf that's pasteurised and homogenised and it always looks the same, but actually it's always different. You get different colours, different flavours, and isolating them frame by frame is just a beautiful way to do it, rather than mixing it all together like we used to do conventionally. You still get honey, but it's not as good as being able to isolate the different flavours and enjoy each one that's being brought in by the bees. And if you have a look at this frame here, that is the frame we are harvesting right now, and you can see how it's changed in colour because the honey's drained out from beneath their feet. And it was a real win when we were inventing the flow hive, that the bees are clever enough to notice when that honey disappears from beneath their feet, and that then triggers them to then chew away the capping, recycle that wax, and the whole process starts again.
Yeah, we didn't know whether they would do that. We thought, well, great, you know, it was an exciting time. After 8, maybe more years of experimenting, we finally did it. We got honey coming out of a beehive without actually opening the hive. But then, as Sita was saying, we didn't know what the bees would do. Would they just not notice? In which case, there'd be a beehive that wasn't full of honey, but the bees thought was full of honey, and that seemed messy. Or maybe the bees really noticed. And one thing bees will do if they're not happy with what's going on is they'll abscond. They'll take off and leave the hive. European honeybees don't do that quite as readily as, say, the Asian bees that I was talking about before. But anyway, they didn't abscond, and but they did notice, and within a day they were chewing back all of the capping, repairing all the cells, and beginning to fill them with honey again. Yippee, we were on a journey.
Have we got any questions coming in, Laura?
Yeah, we've got lots of people tuning in. It's really cool. We got some beekeepers that are definitely in that seasonal mindset, starting to plan ahead. For example, we've got someone who's based in Northeast Texas, middle of summer right now, stinking hot.
Wow.
But we've got Vina asking if she should take her super off her Flow Hive 2 Plus in the winter and replace it with a feeder box.
Okay, so it does depend where you are and also your strategy as a beekeeper. And right up here in Pennsylvania, Fred Dunn's done quite a lot of experimentation, and what he's come to in terms of how much honey reserves in that extreme cold winter there, he likes to have a single brood box and then an ideal size here, and he makes sure that's full of honey so the bees have something to chew on so they can survive through to the following spring. And he said this year all his flow hives survived through, so that's the strategy he uses. If you ask another beekeeper, they might suggest you have a full box of honey, and some people suggest you need 2 boxes of honey for your hive to survive the long cold winter. So you will get different answers, but of course we do need to make sure they do have honey stores, because it is their food to survive through a long time with no flowers. So you're asking the right questions in order to make sure you're looking after the bees. As to whether you take off the honey super, some people do, some people don't, because you might decide that the remaining honey in the flow super will be good for the bees to live on through that cold winter. But one thing you should do regardless is remove the queen excluder. That way, if your bees are in a cluster down here consuming the remaining honey on the edge, and once that consumed, they move up, that means that queen can travel with that cluster up through the hive as they consume any remaining honey stores. Otherwise, the queen can be left behind, and then you'll start the spring without a queen. So a little overwintering tip there. We've got lots of videos on the beekeeper.org where we go specifically into overwintering with experts that are in those extreme cold winter areas. Look at that honey, it's just pouring out, and I love it that it's a different colour. Isn't that incredible? Just shining in the sun, and a different flavour to boot as well.
That is amazing. Cedar, I've got another question now that we're on the topic of harvesting honey. How do you know when a frame is ready to be harvested, especially for maybe some of those frames that are in the middle and you can't see through them through the side window? How do you know when they're ready to harvest?
Okay, great question. So the wax capping is what you are looking for. So this frame tells a story that there has been a lot of nectar available recently. You can see it glistening. Not only that, they're starting to put the wax capping on to say this frame is full. And ideally, you are harvesting when they've got the wax capping over the whole frame. And that way, that moisture content will be lower, and it'll keep on the jar, in the jar, on the shelf for the long term. Now your question is specifically about what happens in the middle, because we've got this view here which is actually quite helpful. You can see down between the frames a little bit. So if you have a close look, you can actually see the capping on these two frames. So that's really handy. But of course, if you're unsure, you can pop a frame out and have a look and just make sure that what you're seeing is matching up with what you think's going on. But after a while, the key is observing over time, and the windows tell a story, and you get to understand what it looks like when the bees are a bit hungry and perhaps eating some of the honey above the brood nest, and what it looks like when the honey's coming in. And you can take a pretty good educated guess from the outside without having to pull the box apart and harvest beautiful honey like we're doing today.
There's another aspect that we always used to do. Cedar will have to be close to me because of the microphone, and that's called hefting the hive. So if we take this hive here, you can just lift the back. It won't worry the bees, and just feel the weight of it. Now if you start doing that from the very beginning, getting used to the weight of the hive, when of course Cedar just installed a nuke in a box just before, it will be very, very light. When this is full of honey, it is extraordinarily heavy. You will feel the difference. And so when it is, it's just another way to tell, is there honey to harvest, by feeling the weight of it and getting used to how much weight there is in a hive. Called hefting.
And because conventional beekeepers don't have any windows, that's really the only means they've got, is going and lifting the hives. So what we've done is put windows on the hives so you don't have to do that. You can just look in and get a really good idea. And commercial beekeepers go, oh, why do you need these windows? And after we give them a flow hive, they're like, oh, hang on a second, these windows are really useful for not only telling when the honey's ready, but also the strength of the colony. So you look in here and go, this hive is actually a bit low on numbers, it's a bit weak, we better keep an eye on it, we better activate the beetle trap down here and make sure we're looking after them and that they do build up in numbers as the season progresses in spring. Look at that, two beautiful colours from our flow hives here.
You thought that would be our paperbark or melaleuca honey, and it's got that green iridescence about it. So it looks like it, but you're saying it doesn't taste like it.
Doesn't taste like it at all. It's definitely something else. There's a lot flowering in the area. Now, if you've got questions, put it in the comments. We have got time to answer a few more.
Yeah, Cedar, I've got one for you. I mean, we're harvesting 2 jars of this beautiful honey, but are the bees bothered by that at all? Even like inside the super?
So the whole idea with inventing the flow hive was, let's just harvest honey easily and gently while letting the bees be. Now that is so different to the conventional way of harvesting, where you're taking the top box, you're blowing the bees out with a leaf blower or brushing them all off and taking the frames to a processing shed. And you can really see here the bees are starting to cotton on, that the honey's drained out from beneath their feet, but it's a pretty calm kind of demeanor in there. They really, I can confidently say, harvesting honey in this way, you'll harm a lot less bees than conventional. And one of the key points to that was making sure there was gaps for the bees' knees, as a way to put it. So if you look here, you've got our flow frame matrix. Now, some of our early prototypes had the parts meeting each other, meaning that if there was an area where the bees would down the cells, ideally you're harvesting when the frame is all capped, so they're standing on their capping. But if you are harvesting when there is bees down the cells, we wanted to make sure there was enough space should the bee put a leg or a wing between the moving parts. So what we've got there is a V-shaped gap that the bees bridge with their comb. So when the parts move, the wax breaks, and when they come back together, it's not any form of guillotine for the bees. There's actually a gap there for the bees' legs and wings, should they be putting one in that area. So that was an important piece of innovation, to make sure we are harvesting in the gentlest way possible for the bees. And we actually have a whole patent specifically about that. And you'll see here, when I turn this key, what happens inside the frame. So we're looking at what looks like hexagon cells here, and if I turn this key, you'll see that in about to here, this section I have then opened to form zigzagging channels for the honey to flow down, and that is the simple invention.
It's pretty amazing, especially considering like those two massive jars of honey filling up right now. And you've got what, 7 frames in there? How many frames could you simultaneously harvest at one time?
So a lot of people do harvest all of them at once, but it actually is more gentle for the colony to have less honey disappearing at a time. Now, if you're coming from conventional beekeeping, you take all because it's such an ordeal to get into your hives and take the honey. You'll take as much as you can while you're at it to make the process anywhere efficient at all. So we find that people who are existing beekeepers, they want to take all, but the beginning beekeepers like to just harvest a big jar like that, and they're happy to take that back to the table. Now, the advantage of harvesting just a little bit is you're not taking away suddenly all of the thermal mass. The bees are used to putting honey above their brood and around their brood as a thermal mass, and also you're not creating a big area to clean up at once. If you have a look at this, the bees are then getting into it. They've got a job to do now, and what they'll do if you harvest all the frames at once is half the bees will clear right out of the hive so they can get the humidity correct, so they can get the ventilation going, and that is more of a disturbance. And also sometimes you get honey spilling down the face of the comb while you're harvesting, and if you're harvesting less frames at once, then that's very manageable for the bees. They'll just lick that up, no problem. If you're harvesting them all at once, oftentimes it's fine, but sometimes you get more honey flowing down into the tray at the bottom. We've got a big tray down there, so it doesn't matter too much, but still, if you're having trouble with that, harvest less frames in a sitting.
Thanks, Cedar. So for someone that's interested in getting started in beekeeping, would you recommend starting with 2 hives, or is starting with 1 hive good enough?
So it's always good if you can have a couple of hives, because that makes you more self-sufficient as a beekeeper. If you have 1 hive that's perhaps got a queen that's died or failed and not laying, there's no new baby bees being made in the hive, then you could get a frame out of the bottom of the other one, a bit like what you saw us doing this morning, installing the nuke, and you'd be making sure on that frame there was eggs down the cells, and you'd put that across to the hive that didn't have a queen, and they will usually raise a queen by feeding the young larvae royal jelly for her entire gestation. So having 2 hives also lets you benchmark what's going on in the season. If one hive's really weak and one's really strong, you know the weak one might have an issue for some reason, and that's a nice tip and some good information for you to then intervene as a beekeeper and help that hive that's a little bit weak. So yes, 2 hives is better than 1, but 1's better than none, and we've all got to start somewhere. Now look at this, this is a very dark honey. We've covered this up should bees come sniffing around the back for honey. And we can then have a look at that now and taste test the difference between one and another. Okay, any more questions coming in?
Yeah, we got heaps coming through. So kind of on what you were just talking about, you know, when a hive is getting a new queen, and Stu had mentioned it earlier when we were talking about swarming and splitting hives potentially, and Stu showed us that queen cell, which was really interesting. How does a hive decide when they're ready to breed a new queen, and how does that process work?
Okay, there's lots of things that might stimulate that. One is overcrowding, and that is a typical thing for beekeepers to manage in the springtime, where bees find an abundance of nectar that triggers the queen to lay a lot of eggs. At the same time, there's a lot of nectar coming in, really taking up space in the hive as well. And what that can mean is the bees decide to swarm. So it's typical in the springtime to see a whole lot of swarm cells, just like you're seeing the queen cell in the hive Stu was looking at earlier. They might raise a number of swarm cells or queen cells, and in preparation to divide the colony in half, and half your bees will fly away if you're not careful in the springtime. It's a good idea to get ahead of the curve and make sure you are managing the size of the hive for the size of the colony, which my favorite thing to do is you simply take some of the frames out of this bottom box and put it in another hive, and that's called a split. It really relieves the congestion in this hive and also gives you another hive, which if you don't want, somebody else really will appreciate another hive, and you'll be helping somebody get started in beekeeping.
Thanks, Cedar. I've got an interesting one. Exie's asking, can I put an already cultivated hive into a flow hive? I'm guessing if they've got Langstroth frames and they want to add them to a flow hive. Is that something you could do?
Yes, so that's a great way to start, especially if you're outside of the peak season. So for instance, swapping a hive into a flow hive you could do just about any time of year. I guess you're not going to be doing that in extreme cold snowy times if you're in that climate, but the advantage of starting with a big colony of bees is you don't need to have that build up phase where they're building up to being ready to put the super on. They're simply a large colony ready for the honey super straight away.
I mean, this this hive here is a Langstroth size, so any Langstroth boxes, well, this one's a 10 frame Langstroth, which fits 7 of our flow frames confusingly, but it's called a Lang 10, and so we've made them compatible, completely compatible with Langstroth hives. You can just take a Langstroth, brood box, bang, on goes the flow super. You know, it doesn't have to be all flow equipment if you don't want. You can just get the flow super and put that on. We thought, when we made these flow frames and invented the whole thing, we thought most people would only buy the frames and insert them into their Langstroth hives and just get a circular saw out and cut them. But we were wrong. Most people wanted to buy the whole complete kit. But you don't have to. You can mix and match Langstroth hives with flow hives because they're the same sizes.
And what we've gone and done over time is we've built more and more features into the flow hive to make not only the honey harvesting easier, which is a flow frame invention here, it's also to make the beekeeping easier. So we've got the pest management tray down here, and you've got the ventilation control here, you've got an inbuilt stand into the base here, you've got ant guards down here. So all of this, and we've got the windows up here, is to just help make beekeeping easier and give you more insights into the world of the bees. We're going to show you a few tips now of how to finish up your honey harvest. So it's basically the reverse of how we started, but the key goes now in the top slot. And a little tip here is you push it all the way to the back, making sure we're then closing all of the cell parts. Now it's easy to turn on the way back, but a tip is you leave it there in that 90-degree position to push all of the frame parts back into the cell form position, which means you've got correct cell shape. If you do a quick close, they might bounce back because wax and propolis is a bit sticky, and you might end up with wobbly shaped cells that will impede the flow path later for your next harvest. So leave that while you're packing up the bits and pieces. Then you're just doing a hot swap with this tube to here, and you can do it with very little mess if you are quick. And that's very different to harvesting in the conventional way. You've only got this little piece, which is a joy to clean up because you can taste the different honeys. Now don't leave that out for the bees, because we don't want them to get in a mood for looking for honey rather than flower nectar. Now here we have a beautiful jar of honey, and what's really interesting is it needs no further processing, no sieving and settling, and the honey is perfectly ready for the table. And if you look in the top, there's even very little debris, which is just really interesting in itself. You'd think it'd be full of little wax flakes. When you harvest conventionally, the honey is full of bee bits and wax and bits and things that you need to settle out and scrape off the top and sieve and so on. But the way our flow frame invention works, the honey comes out, and at worst you might get a couple of little flakes that'll float to the top, but really it's ready for the table as it is. Now we can go ahead and close this one. As we were talking about earlier, this cap was left off at the top and the ants have moved in, so a little tip there is always put that cap in the top. We'll leave that there for a minute or two and just let those parts settle into position. We can go and then put in this little cap here, and we have another beautiful jar of honey, which, if we compare the colours, look at that, 2 different colours, 2 different flavours, 2 different frames, and that is a real joy. And some beekeepers keeping their flow hives say harvesting all the frames into a big bucket is a big mistake, because you don't get to enjoy all the different colours and flavours that's coming into your one hive. We've got time for 2 more questions.
Yeah, Cedar. I got someone who's quite attached to their flow hive for obvious reasons, but they're preparing to move house. How do you move your flow hive when you're moving house?
Okay, so moving a flow hive, and we've got videos showing you how to do that. You will take this gabled roof off, you put a strap all the way around to keep it together. Best thing to do is close it up at night time or in the early morning, so get out there just before dawn. Sometimes a little bit of smoke is needed, so you're in your bee suit, and a little bit of smoke at the entrance will just get the bees to go inside. Now once you've got them inside, you need to block the entrance using either our entrance reducer, which flips upside down as an entrance closure, or any kind of thing to block the entrance. It could be some steel wool or something like that. Once you've got that entrance blocked, you've got your hive ready to move. And it's best to move in the cooler parts of the day. Beware of overheating, and also make sure you're giving them good ventilation. You might like to take the tray in the bottom out altogether, so they've got plenty of ventilation in transport. Get a hand to lift that onto your pickup or your trailer, and then you can tie that down, transfer it to the new location, and it's as simple as putting it there, taking the entrance out, and the bees will start orientating to the new area. Some bees are pretty calm when you open the entrance for the first time, and others are a bit wild, so often you're pulling the entrance and moving away and letting them orientate themselves to that new location.
Just to talk about the new location, it should be 6 miles or 10 kilometres at least away from your current one in general, because bees know their area, and they will fly up to 10 kilometres searching for nectar. And therefore, if you only move your hives next door, the bees will come back to the original place. If you only move it a kilometre away, they'll come back to the original place. So best, if possible, to move it at least 10 kilometres.
But let me give you a quick tip though. If you've got a shorter move, but 1 kilometre or even just across the other side of your yard, you can help the bees by using a reorientation technique. So if you've got a shorter than a 6 kilometre move, then you can move the hive and then put a big leafy branch in front, quite dense, so when the bees come racing out enthusiastically to do their foraging, they run into that obstacle, and that causes them to go, hang on a second, something's different, something's changed. And you'll see them then doing their circular orientation flights, and most of the forager bees will then reorientate to the new location. And you get about 5% of them returning to the old, which you could set up a cardboard box, collect them and ferry them across, or you could let them find their own way. So we're about to wrap up.
Cedar, we've actually got a little bit more time. Is there another frame that we can harvest a little bit more honey?
Sure, we can harvest another frame of honey. We've got some beautiful colours and flavours here, and if you've got some questions, just put them in the comments and we will get to answering those. Well, I think there's more honey in this one right here. You can see this beautiful capping down the sides of the frame. So people often ask, how do you know when the honey's ready? Well, ideally you're seeing that wax capping right on top of the flow frames, and the pattern here that you're seeing in the windows and in the back window really do tell a story of what's going on. So we can certainly see some good capping there. So let's choose this frame. All we're doing is inserting this little tube. Be mindful that there's a little tongue there. That it's important that it blocks a little, what we call the leak back point. When you're finished harvesting, any remaining honey that's dripping through will go back to the hives for the bees, but we need to block that with that little tongue. Now, the cap comes out of the top, and we simply put the key in the bottom slot here and turn it. Now, harvesting it in segments like this, so 1, 2, 3, will make it a lot easier for you to turn that key, and the honey in a moment will start streaming down the tube and into the jar, which I'm actually excited to taste the difference and see what it is compared to the other flavours we've been harvesting.
And how big is that jar?
That jar is a 2 litre jar. Most of the time it fits a full frame. Sometimes we overflow it if the bees have really drawn their beautiful comb out further from the flow frame face and stored a bumper amount of honey.
Yeah, and this will be an interesting one, especially with the third frame going now. We'll see if that color is a lot different than the other two. But can you explain briefly, why are the colors so different?
So the color is there from the flower source of nectar itself. So each different nectar producing flower will have a certain color and flavor. So the bees, if they're collecting on the paperbark, for instance, will have these dark multi-tones. It actually comes in kind of a little bit fluoro at first and then settles into this kind of colour. When you get the springtime flowers flowering, you get these lighter colours in this area all the way through to just about clear, and we get all of these light coloured beautiful spring, very aromatic flavours. Citrus blossom is actually a beautiful honey. And then in the winter time we actually get those darker tones. So looking forward to seeing what this spring brings. We're here in the southern hemisphere, but in the northern hemisphere you are in the middle of the summer. Let us know what is flowering in your area. We have something like 70,000 flow hives across North America. So chime in, let us know where you are, what type of honeys are around you, and whether you are beekeeping already or not.
Thanks, Cedar. I've got an interesting question here about kind of like colony disposition, because we had a really nice time over at the boat hive harvesting, and Stu, you were commenting about how docile and calm this colony was and how healthy it was. But I've got a question here. They're asking, what can you do if you have a cranky hive without killing the queen? What do you do if you have a cranky hive?
So if you have a cranky hive, that's generally because you have genetics that are more defensive. So what happens when the queen goes on her mating flight, her genetics herself are set, but she might mate with some rascal drones from down the road. Now, she only mates in the first week of her life, and then she has enough sperm to last for up to 6 years of laying, sometimes a couple of thousand eggs a day. So the genetics of the perhaps 30 drones she's mated with and her own genetics will determine the temperament of the hive. So if you're finding your hive is a little more territorial, a little aggressive, and that's bothering you, what you'll need to do, and you may need to get some help from an experienced beekeeper, you get in there, you find the queen, you take her away and introduce a new queen of known genetics. And if you really want to increase your chances of getting a nice, gentle, productive queen, go and get one off a beekeeper that's breeding beautiful, nice, gentle colonies of bees. And that way you can get a nice hive that's easy to be around, and they're less likely to get that really defensive aggression protecting their hive.
Having said that, that's all correct, but it may be just a one-off. They're just cranking on that day, but they're usually calm. We've had beautiful sunny weather here this morning, but we're about to get cold winds and rain blowing in, and if I went and opened a hive, some of them will get cranky about being opened on a cold, blowy day. In fact, most of them do. And sometimes bees just have off days. They're like people, and a hive that's been calm is just cranky that day for what, we don't know why. But you can ask them. And then the next day they'll be calm again. So usually you're talking about a hive that's been consistently cranky over a few weeks. Time to replace the queen.
Some beekeepers put a mark on the back of the hive. I know a commercial beekeeper that goes 3 strikes and they're out. So that way, you know, if they're grumpy 2 times but not the third, they're like, oh, they might be just fine. Okay, so we've got some beautiful honey just pouring into this jar here. This one has a completely different flavour.
Yummy. Very sweet.
Oh yeah, that's a beautiful flavour. I'm trying to pinpoint it. It comes in about this time each year, and it's may even be from palms. Palms produce an amazing flavour, and if you get enough of them flowering around, you can really get those flavours coming into your hive. So
date taste.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. So but the citrus will be blossoming soon, which has an amazing flavour, and really for me in this area, the citrus blossoms, when they start blossoming, that's the time when also the bees start blossoming and swarming. And so each year the citrus blossoms coincides with, you better look out and manage your colonies that are getting overcrowded, and also look out for swarms, whether it be by your hives or other people's, and that way you can catch those swarms, put them in the bottom box, and you can start a new colony that way as well.
Cedar, I've got a question about maintaining your hive. What kind of cleaning and maintenance is required? How often do you need to clean your hive, if at all?
Okay, so the flow frames themselves, if the flow frames stay on the hive, the bees do a fairly good job of keeping them clean. Having said that, we've found after 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, beekeepers are preferring to take them out. Here's some frames. This frame here is 4 or 5 years in, and this frame is pretty new, and you can see the difference. There's a lot of wax build-up in the cells, so each time the bees use it, they're putting more and more wax, and after some time it can be useful to clean that out. But we're talking, you know, many years of good use before you need to remove these from the hive and give them a pressure wash to really clean some wax off, dry them in the shade, and then you can get them back on a hive again. The other thing that sometimes needs cleaning is this little area down here. So while this is nice and clean here, sometimes you can get into the situation where a bit of honey's been hanging around in there, and if you're in a humid climate, it's perhaps fermented, and you might want to give that area a little wipe out before you start. The other area that needs cleaning sometimes, well, more often, is the tray underneath. We've got our pest management tray down here, extremely useful for catching those hive beetles and managing the varroa. And in here, you'll no doubt have a bit of gunk building up, especially if you've been having cooking oil in there and catching the beetles. Cleaning that out just by scraping it with your hive tool is a good thing to do. And you may need to do that every couple of months just to refresh that and keep that as active. Now this also tells a story. I think Stu's just having a close look here. You've got, see these little domes? They're the top of the worker brood cell, showing there's a new lot of worker brood emerging. And so looking in here can give you a bit of an idea of what's going on inside the hive as well. So that's good to see. We know that in frames about here and here in the hive, we've had a recent emergence of a lot of new baby bees ready to take on the chores of the hive. And one of the first things they do is clean out the cells they came out of, which is one of the many jobs the worker bees get. And it's in the last couple of weeks of their little worker bee life, that might only be 4 or 5 weeks long, that they actually get to do the foraging work, heading out, collecting nectar, collecting pollen, and also sometimes water to bring back to the hive for evaporative cooling in those hot times. So bees are incredible at air conditioning and keeping their hive in good check. So there's a long way to say there's not a whole lot of cleaning needed, but of course it's not a set and forget. You do need to look after your brood nest, do your brood inspections, make sure you're trapping pests down here. And in Australia, we have the more recent pests as we join the rest of the world with managing those varroa mites and making sure they're at a low number as well. And really important to also catch the hive beetles if you have them in your area. So that's what the pest management tray down here is for, and that does need cleaning from time to time. Look at that beautiful honey. Have we got any more questions coming in?
Yeah, Cedar, now that we're kind of on a pest management chat, I had a viewer write in and say that they've just gotten some new ant guards and they want to add them to their kit, add them to their hive stand. Do you have any tips on the best way to add those new ant guards?
Okay, so what you'll need to do is prop up the hive and then thread the leg out and then fit your ant guard and thread it back in. So to do that, then you'll need a little bit of height. So it depends on how you've set up your hive, but the first thing to do would be to lift one side and unscrew the legs almost all the way, and do the same on the other side. That way it's only a small lift to then unthread that leg, put your ant guard on and put it back on. It's obviously a bit easier to set it up when you're installing the legs for the first time, but it is possible to fit your ant guards once your hive is already populated.
Thanks, Cedar. I've got another one from Andrew. He's based in South Australia, so still in that winter phase, but he's looking ahead to spring. And he's asking if he's setting up from a nuke, should he wait for warmer weather?
So South Australia, you're in a long cold winter, you probably won't be able to find bees to purchase until the weather warms up in springtime. So oftentimes when you can start is actually when you can get hold of the bees, and for you, as you say, it'll be most likely as spring kicks in and the bees are building up and beekeepers are creating their nucleuses for you to purchase.
Thanks, Cedar. I've got another one from Vina. She's really tapped in. She's been sending in some good questions. She's had her nukes installed since the end of April, and she's based in Northeast Texas. She's been feeding them on a steady diet of sugar syrup every week ever since. She says that she's harvested approximately 5 pints of honey from each of her 2 flow hives, and she's asking, is it safe to go ahead and stop feeding them sugar syrup?
Absolutely. So generally feed sugar for a couple of reasons. One is, and usually the most important one, is feeding them so they have some stores prior to a winter. Now it's best if they've got stores of honey, and then you don't need to feed them. But if they don't have stores of honey, then they will need something to survive on through a long cold winter. So usually in the fall, beekeepers are checking their levels of stores in their hives, and if a hive is a bit low, that's when they'll feed what's called a thick syrup, and the bees will then store it as if it's honey, so they have some stores to survive on. The other one, which is what you were doing in the beginning, is feeding them a thin syrup, which is a 1-to-1 sugar to water ratio that you will then cook up on the stove, let cool, and then put in your chosen feeder. And that's probably what you're doing now, and what stimulated your bees to really, well, what happens is it stimulates nectar, it stimulates the queen to lay a lot of eggs, and you get a big population boom, which is a common thing to do for commercial beekeepers ahead of a good nectar flow, so they've got a big population to go and get that nectar. As a backyard beekeeper, you don't have to worry about that so much. You can just let them build up of their own accord. And if you've been harvesting honey, you certainly don't need to be feeding them, because they're finding a lot of flowers and really storing a lot of nectar. So generally you'd just be feeding them early until they're really on their feet, and then leaving them to their own devices when you see a lot of nectar coming in.
Thanks, Cedar. I know this has been a hot topic in Australia, that someone has just asked and written in, and kind of going off the back of our pest management chat, but what do we do about mites?
So here in Australia, just to recap, we've had the mites come into Newcastle several years back, and they've slowly been spreading out. And they travel as fast as a truckload of bees do, and every time there's mites in a new area, you get what's called the build-up phase, where colonies get weakened. The hive beetles, if you got them in the area, tend to really knock off the weak hives quite quickly, and then you have the situation where your hives might go and collect the nectar from, or the honey stores from, a dying unmanaged colony, and at the same time pick up a truckload of mites and bring them back into your hive, and that's called a mite bomb. So for us, just almost 2 years ago, it came to this area, and what happened is we got a lot of mites flooding into our hives, and we really had to work hard to manage them. So the way we did that here is, I like to keep things organic, so we use the 2 organic acids, formic acid and oxalic acid. Now they're 2 acids that exist already in honey, and they exist in a lot of foods. Having said that, when you use formic acid, the label says don't harvest for a week after using it. Formic acid comes in the form of Formic Pro. We can purchase it here in Australia. They go on top of the brood frames, and they're good for really knocking down the mite load drastically. So if you've got a mite count of 100, then putting the formic acid pads will reduce it to 2 or 3 perhaps. So massive knockdown of mites. They literally rain down. For flow hive beekeepers, we find a lot of beekeepers just putting it in the tray below, which seems to work really well. It's off label, but you can put them there and it has the same effect as putting them on top of the brood frames. Some people are experimenting with just putting them in overnight because they're easy to take out again, getting that big deluge of mites and then putting them away again, because formic acid has a drawback of sometimes you'll lose your queen. And particularly in the hotter times, it also has limitations. You can't use it when it's above 33 degrees C, is that the temperature? And so that's formic acid, useful for knocking down a huge mite load. Now oxalic acid is useful for holding the mite load in the form of strips. So if you put oxalic acid strips, like little paper staples, over the brood frames, or big paper staples rather, and that'll hold that mite level down and give you several months of worry-free time there. Another one which has worked with great success is the oxalic acid fogging. Now if you've got a number of hives, it could be worth getting an oxalic acid fogging machine, which is connects to a drill battery, and it's then very quick to put that fog into each hive, just 30 seconds a hive, and it knocks the phoretic mites, the ones crawling around on the bees, right off the bees. And if you do that a week later, then that has a good effect, and maybe a week later again, and that way you really can reduce the mite load by using the fogging machine. So they're all the things that we did, but the main tip I'll give you if you're in an area that's just getting the Varroa now is manage the beetles. So if you're in an area with hive beetles, that's what tended to decimate our colonies, is all of a sudden you get an explosion of hive beetles and you end up with a lot more beetles attacking hives. So use our pest management tray down here or any other beetle trap method to really trap those beetles. So it's great that we've got communities of people really looking after the bees and making sure they get through this, what we call the build-up phase, because we need enough colonies left so that we can then take our splits and build up again, which bees are very good at doing, is building up, and then so this spring we'll be dividing colonies that are strong and helping people repopulate if they have lost hives due to the Varroa and hive beetles. So that's a sort of a quick wrap of what we did here, but chime in, let us know what you do in your area, and if you're in North America or Europe or somewhere that's had hive beetles, somewhere that's had Varroa for 30 years or more, then let us know what you do from time to time to manage those annoying little mites. Now, we are harvesting honey here. We just harvested another jar, and while we were talking with a few more questions there, we've perfectly filled another jar of honey here, which is a delight to taste. And just that tip in the top of the frame here, turn it to close all of those cells back into the cell form position, and the bees will rip into it, recycling that wax, and the whole process starts again. Thank you very much for all your questions. We'll be here again, same time next week. Let us know what you'd like us to cover, and we'll be back with another show and tell. And in the meantime, if you've got answers to other people's questions, it's fantastic to see you chiming in on a global scale, and it's been incredible for Stu and I inventing the Flow Hive and really having this global community blossom of beekeepers, and more than anything, just the learning and the sharing of knowledge that's happened has been incredible. And it's just been this amazing, really, journey of working together to look after the honeybees, which is so important to not only pollination but also for the beautiful thing we call honey. So same time next week, see you then.
It's been great.